I'm Kristen at Artistic Artifacts. I know we told you that it was Judy Gula and me today, but we switched places. I'm usually the person behind the camera, and Judy's the one as Chief Creative Mind here in front of you. But today I'm going to talk about creative grids, rulers, and some of the patterns that we use here in the shop. But I also wanted to let you know that me being in front of the camera is just part of the introductions we're going to be doing over the next couple months of the people who make artistic artifacts work behind the scenes. When we used to go to shows and the shop was open to regular customers, you got to meet us in person, you came to classes, and now we're going to have to introduce you because we have a whole new following. I am Christine Vinh. Other people know me as StitchesnQuilts. And I'm the person who does the social media. So if you're getting answers to your comments and questions and messages, I'm the person who's usually answering them. And if I can't, they go to the staff here at the shop. I also do the shop samples, which has just allowed me to play with lots of fun fabric, because when it comes in, I'm like, ooh la la, I've got a new project to work on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the patterns, the grids, but first I thought I would talk about the essential tools you need in your sewing room. Everybody needs a creative grids, long ruler. I use a 6.5. I know we just got a newer one that's a little bit wider, but to me this is an essential tool for squaring up my quilts, cutting longer strips, a whole lot of things that you want to do. Obviously, we all need a rotary cutter. We have a couple different kinds. I've been using an Olfa one for years. I like the 45. It fits my hand well. It cuts well. Somebody asked me recently, how often do I change the blade? There's no rhyme or reason. I do it when the fabric when I'm having trouble.
Comments read the sound more than once. Can't hear.
Can't hear. Okay.
But Chris, you've got a soft voice too, so.
Well, I thought I was talking really
All
loud.
right.
Okay, I'll raise my voice. Other tools that have been essential, most of them I have in my sewing room, and there are a few that will actually go home with me today, because I realized that I don't have them and I could really use them. I use a 97 foot. It's a 1/4 inch patchwork foot. It makes
Dual feed.
And this one's dual feed for those machines that have the dual feed feature. Highly recommend it. It's made a lot of difference, and it's actually the primary foot that I use. The other thing that has really made a difference to me in sewing my 1/4 inch seams, I have this laid out on my Sew Steady table, and when I line up my 1/4 inch foot, I also have this 1/4 inch line. So when I'm sewing, I'm actually able to put this here, and I follow the line rather than the needle when I'm stitching. It has made an enormous amount of difference in my ability to sew a straight line. And that's the grid slider by Sew Steady. What's going home with me today is a nice little iron. This is the OSO iron that we now carry. It's a nice small size, and also going home will be a mat. This is a wool pressing mat, and in working on this project, which I'll show you, well, I actually could show you this one first because it's a work in progress. This is using the log cabin quilt, and one of the first things, this is the 10-inch log cabin trim tool duo. One of the first things I want to say is the instructions that come with each of the rulers are incredible. I would use them. I put these by both my cutting table and my sewing table. And as you can see on this one, I've actually circled reminders to myself as I'm going through the process. So I'm actually working on a duo log cabin using the flare fabric that actually just went on sale, and a new elements. I think this is red on the fire that just came in. So Jean Ann Wright showed this a few months ago, and when she told us, both Judy and I walked away and said she's doing this by one block at a time. I said, doesn't work for me. So I'm actually strip piecing mine. So the first thing you do is you cut your 2.5 inch block. Tells you 2.5 inch block. I cut my strip to the width that I wanted it based on the instructions, and I strip pieced it. So then I'm going to cut along here, and the reason I need the iron in the cutting mat is that once I've cut it, I need to press it down. And that makes a lot of difference. And then what happens is this piece becomes this piece. And then this piece, and then this piece. But before I show you how I cut it and use the ruler, I'm going to show one last thing because I'm actually going to take this away. These are the new Creative Grid rulers. This one is two-sided, so this is what you're used to seeing on your mats. And this one is actually made with less lines and matches the lines on your Stripology ruler. So it is meant on the back side to be actually used with your Stripology. You don't have as many little markings as a distraction when you're using your ruler. New tool that might go home with me today, but I'll see how my account rings up. So to go back to the log cabin quilt, once I've done my first round, which is this, what you do is you take the ruler and it shows you standard round 1. You put the ruler, the block is right around it. It fits right around the block. I'm going to trim. Move my best press. Turn it around. So even if your strips aren't all the same size, by using the tool, your strips all end up as a perfect square. The next round was a skinny round. So this started with a 1 3/4 inch strip, and this started with a 1 1/4 inch strip. I was cutting fabric straight off the yardage, so I was cutting specifically, but you can use scraps, you can use whatever. So to do this one, it says to cut that you want to use skinny R3 as how you cut your rounds. So this was the standard rounds. These are the skinny rounds. So I actually go to skinny round 3 and match it up in the corner. So this says round 3, it's matched up in the corner of my block. Might need to change my blade soon. And I have a perfect square. And then I did the same thing with this, where then I added the next round, and the instructions say go to skinny round 6, even though, oh no, anyway, this is as far as I got.
Our attention span with
yes,
directions is a
yes.
little.
And reading them upside down doesn't work. So the other thing I wanted to actually show you with the Stripology ruler, when I said that I was cutting 1 1/4 inch, why the Stripology ruler really works well is to get straight strips for multiple strips. What this allowed me to do was, it only has, they're 1/2 inch markings, but what this allowed me to do was to go, and instead of marking it at the 0 line, I moved over to the 1/4 inch line. So I'm at the 1/4 inch, and when I cut, I'm cutting 1 1/2 inch, and this is how you use the ruler. You put it right through the slit in the ruler, and I've now, Chris, you really should have changed your blade.
This is how you know when it doesn't cut.
So now I have a perfectly cut, evenly cut 1 1/4 inch. I could not do that with my 24 inch ruler, because what happens when I use the long ruler is I have, even though it's got grippers on the back, when I'm doing it, I find that by the time I start out here, but as the time I get up here, my hand is slipped and I end up with, I'm a little bit off. So that's why this ruler has worked.
Now there's different sizes of this ruler, right, Chris?
There's 3 sizes. We have the Stripology XL Ruler is the most recent ruler that has come out. I find that this works for me for almost every single project that I work, unless I'm using the mini one, which is what I used on the little Stella. So these are smaller blocks. This one is a combination of Leslie Riley's foliage and some pieces from Leslie Tucker Jennison's warehouse. And this calls for the mini ruler. Same concept. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to work with small blocks. And then there is another one, which I thought I had on the table that I've probably moved, which is just the Stripology ruler. And that often comes in handy if you don't have a lot of space, and you, so if your cutting table isn't that large, and if you're turning the ruler, it really, it works well. I have found this one works. Oftentimes you're told that you need a square ruler in your toolkit in your sewing room. This ruler allows you that maybe you don't need it. It's an expensive ruler, but you could get away without adding a square ruler, because if you turn this, what it has is markings. So if you're trimming a block up to 4 1/2 inch square, you put your block here. Where are those blocks? So if I wanted to trim this, if this was the final block and I wasn't going to do anything else with it, it should be an 8 1/2 inch block. Actually, if I want to make it a 7 1/2 inch block, because this one is actually perfect because I've cut it and trimmed it already. But if I wanted to make it a 6 1/2 inch block, I would cut right along this line, turn it, and cut again right along the 6 1/2 inch. So, and I would have perfectly square blocks. So this allows you to trim your blocks up all in one tool. The other thing it does is if you are cutting your binding or your borders, sashing, how it works, this is part of a 1/2 yard piece of fabric, wonderful glorious yellow from dear Stella. is you put this down. My edges aren't even over here, so I want to make sure that my zero marking is a little bit in so that I trim my edges. And if I'm going to be making a 3-inch strips, I cut on the 0, and I cut on the 3, and I cut on the 6, and I cut on the 9. I haven't had to move my ruler. The grip on the back of this ruler, the fabric didn't move. I've got my hand here, and I'm using the markings as I go along. Perfect cut. No wonky inside or outside. And Judy's laughing because we both are known for saying that we can't sew a straight stitch and we can't cut a straight line. This ruler and your 97 foot, you got it made in the shade. Any questions? Okay. Can they hear me now?
Yeah, there's been responses that they've heard you fine.
Okay, all right. So one of the popular quilts, the one that we used in our ad, is the Emma quilt. I love the Emma quilt. It has a lot of potential.
I love the Emma quilt. I
And
made
Judy
it.
loves it. It was the first one, and she actually got converted to the rulers. So one of the things is, you know, your first Emma quilt, you can follow the guidelines perfectly and go along and learn how to use it. Judy chose to change hers and how she laid out her blocks, and she added a sashing. So this quilt, I'm using an early version of Sally Kelly's fabrics, is completely different from this quilt, but it's the same pattern. So once you've made one and you figured it out, it's easy to go and say, okay, how do I mix it up?
Hold this one up so
Okay.
we can do that.
What I've done in a couple of mine is I've actually added, this is a new fabric that we hope is arriving this month. It's Alfie by Estimate Cloud. I think that's how you say her name. She's an illustrator artist, and this is her first fabric line. I chose it and love it because of the cats, but also the color. But I chose, because it has such a fun focus fabric, I chose to use those solid and not cut them into the pattern. And I'll show you how you do this. Another one that I'm actually doing is I had leftover blocks. When I made all the blocks for this, I used a fat quarter bundle. These are all made out of fat quarters. I had extra blocks because I chose to make it a crib quilt rather than a lap quilt. So I had leftover blocks. Well, I took an improv class a couple weeks ago with Mel Beach, and so my leftover blocks have now become what looks like an improv quilt. So I took leftover blocks, and then I randomly cut strips and put them in there. So I've got a whole different looking quilt with leftover blocks. Voila. Nothing ever goes to waste. But I'm going to show you why this pattern and tool is great. This is a GEDesign pattern, and I love her patterns. They are so well written, and I'm a visual person, and they have visual diagrams. You do have to read through the entire instructions because, as with the Emma quilt, the Hope quilt, a couple of them, they actually require A blocks and B blocks. Ask me how I know. You know, Judy's common statement. I've ended up with all A blocks. Not a problem. You just lay them out differently. But what she says in the instructions, these are my 10-inch blocks. These are 2 of Valerie Wells' Kismet. You lay 2 on top of each other. take your ruler, and she clearly says, put it with the 0 in your 7. Here's my 7 mark, so I want to make sure my 7 ends up in the corner here, and my 0 mark is here. And then it says to cut at the 2-inch and the 3-inch strip. So you cut here, and you cut here. So I have 2 blocks that I've cut. I'm going to sew those together like that. And then this one will be done like this. Oops.
I've sewn them together that way one time.
And then what you do is you end up that you have a block that looks like this. So then she tells you to turn the block on its side and put 0 and 7 again, just to make sure. Layer the 2 units, squares the 0 and 7. Okay, I've got 0 here. I'm going to make sure I've got 7 up here, and I cut the 2 and 3 again. Oops, I didn't layer them. But what you would then do is, actually I'll do it here again. And as you can see, I'm eyeballing it much quicker than I did the first time around, and you really can get into a good rhythm.
And ultimately, you're going to trim the blocks to the finished size that you want.
So then you sew this in here, and because of how she's done your stitching directions, I have a block, and your pressing directions, they match up. So this matches up because she tells you to press in, they fold into each other, and you get that perfect little square in the middle. Endless opportunities. All right. So let me see what other ruler I want to talk about. This one is the Katy Pattern. This one uses the Stripology ruler as well. And this one is using tilde fabrics.
Let me get a big, there we go.
And one of the things, I didn't use, I also used Dear Stella. So there's a lot of Dear Stella mixed in with this. And I used half yards instead of fat quarters. Partly because I like to piece my backing. So usually I don't end up with any leftover fabric because I've used half-yard pieces. They all go the leftover from the 10-inch strips out of the half yard. These are 8-inch wide strips. They were pieced together to make the backing. So we've been told by our fabric distributors that fat quarter bundles by the manufacturers and by the collections are going to become rarer as fabric distribution has become more difficult due to the pandemic. So you don't have to have fat quarter bundles to make quilts that say fat quarter bundles. Just use your extra fabric on the back. And what I have left over goes to Judy, and she makes fabric postcards. So the Hope quilt is another fun pattern.
Sorry, lost Chris there for a minute.
Okay. So the Hope quilt is another pattern. You've seen this one before. This one is using Norma Rose, but I also mixed in some Dear Stella. I love this Dear Stella. This is white on black, and we've got it in black on white. You can see a few little of Tula Pink fabrics peeking through, and I actually did a binding with the Tula Pink. And again, no fabric goes to waste. I've completely pieced the back. And this one is actually same pattern, different fabrics. These are some of our batik bundles using some of my favorite fabric from Denise Burkett and the Fancy Free collection. But in the pattern, again, this is using your Stripology ruler. Lots of options on how you lay it out. So no matter, you could use one pattern, every quilt's going to look different. You can use completely scrappy, or in this one where I chose one fabric to feature throughout the blocks. And we don't use just all of GEDesigns. This piece here, and I grabbed this fabric fast, and I'm glad I did. This piece was Le Chat. I think we've sold out. Thus, the quilt isn't finished because I haven't needed it for a shop sample. But it used the Ahmad Runner pattern by Christensen Quilts. And she designed the half 60 triangle for creative grids, and that's what's using in this pattern. And again, her pattern is very descriptive, very easy to follow. And what she says is for certain pieces, you want to cut them at the 8.5 inch width. So you lay your fabric at 8.5 inch and you make your cut there. So depending on how big the triangle is going to be, she's going to tell you. This one says at 4.5 inch. Because I happen to have a tuxedo cat at home, I will quilt this and it will go on my table, so it's not gone to waste. I've just had a couple other projects to work on. Another one that just came in is the non-slip Scrappy Crazy 8-inch, and I think we have 3 different of these Scrappy templates. I've never liked templates personally. It's not quick enough for me. That's why I like the Stripology ruler, because they're quick. But I actually played with this yesterday and realized that these templates make life a whole lot easier. So I'm starting here with a 10-inch square. It comes with 3 templates, an A and a B, a C and a D. She shows you, or the and this is actually that comes with the ruler. I'm not using a pattern at this point, how to lay the pieces out. And what she says, the guideline says, is to put your, I can't read upside down. I tried to master it when I was working full-time so I could read what was on people's desks, but it didn't always work. So I'm going to put this way. I'm going to put this way. I'm going to put a ruler here. And then, because I have it on a rotating mat, I can turn it like that. I can then cut that there, rotate it again, and actually cut between. I don't want to do that, I'll cut my hand off. So I've actually just cut those pieces which if I was using a template normally, one, it wouldn't be that high that I could cut with my rotary cutter. But because of the way, and they also show these are 10-inch squares, but show the layout for if you've got scraps that you use in 6-inch strips, if you're just cutting individual pieces, if you're really making a full scrappy quilt. Again, fun tool, and I found this very helpful because doing this on my flat mat required me to move it much more, and I found that the pieces were moving.
Unwind.
Unwind is another one that we have, and this uses, we actually have kits for this. For this size, it's 36-inch square. 2 kits will make the next size up. This was a fabric line we had a couple years ago, and we used leftovers to make some kits. And what, again, this one says you cut using the ruler, and it's the lazy angle ruler. This was one that I read through twice just to make sure I was doing it correctly. But what you're doing is you're taking your 6-inch strip, you cut your first triangle this way, and normally if you're cutting at home, you're not cutting with the plastic on, and then you turn it upside down, flip your fabric. This is why it took me, why I read it a couple times. No.
This is why we don't use rulers that much. Okay, that's fine. Go on to the next one.
I got it because I made the sample, so once I figured it out, it was easy peasy. And the other is, this one actually tells you, this is 3 strips of fabric. I actually had 3 strips of things at home, and I'm making a 6.5 inch. What it does say is you put it at 6.5 inch, you put it down, and you're getting that angle.
Flip your fabric over, somebody said. I think they meant to the back.
Oh, oh, oh. Okay.
Yeah. we
I
said
know,
that.
tried,
It's
you know.
okay.
It works, I'm telling you. I made the quilt, and once I figured it out, I was on a roll.
Yeah.
Right, gotta comment. It is so hard doing live demos. You are doing a great job.
Oh, thank you. And we do have kits of this that are on sale. You can find these under sale fabrics. The kit to make this size quilt includes the fabric for the backing. And it's at $35.99 right now. We have a limited quantity left, but we do have the rulers available. And the last one, oh, I actually have 2 more, is, this is a quilt I just absolutely love.
So much movement.
This is the Taylor quilt, another GEDesign, completely different pattern from some of the others, but again, an easy to construct quilt. This is using the Sally Kelly Solstice
In stock.
in stock. I know she's got another one coming soon, and the new ones actually go with a lot of the fabrics that still, you know, that we have available in this. It comes in 2 colorways. I included some on here, but again, I had leftover blocks because I was using a large bundle. I use my leftover blocks, I turn them on the side and use them as part of the backing so that I could use a width of the fabric I just cut it and then use the width of the fabric. Again, using the Dear Stella, I think that's a dash and flow, to do my backing. And then one other one, and I thought I had the pattern for this one here.
Oh, it's on the front. Well, it says it's out of the book, Stripology
Oh, it's
Squared.
out of the Stripology Squared book. And again, this one actually used a combination of fabrics. Some of them are the Kismet line from Valerie Wells, but I also used palette in it. This one was easy peasy because you're using blocks and cutting them in half and flipping them. And then because I love the elephants, again, I use my leftover fabric on the back. So one of the things I would say is do not hesitate to buy half-yard cuts. I know people say, oh, please cut fat quarters for us. I find having the half yards for all the fabrics that I want in my quilt allows me to play with it, add solid pieces in it, and use it in multiple ways, which the fat quarters oftentimes can be limiting, which is why this quilt, it doesn't have a binding on it because I actually wanted to use one of the fabrics from the line as my binding, and we don't have the yardage yet, and I only use fat quarters for this. In the meantime, I picked something else out and it'll be bound this week, but that's why I prefer using half-yard cuts. Any questions?
All great comments. They're enjoying it and watching. I don't see any questions yet, so.
Okay. What are we doing next week for our Facebook Live?
Not sure. Journal? I think I'm doing journal. I'm doing a journal.
Indian Journal.
Oh,
Indian
we're
journals.
showing off the Indian Journal.
And I'm going to work in it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I work and create my stories in my journals, because I'm not a word girl. Sharon's the word girl, but I'm the picture girl. So I'm going to show you how I actually create some of the pages in my personal art journals.
And we're talking about the journals that we had in a video last week that just got rave reviews. We've actually got them up on the website late yesterday afternoon under paper arts/journals. You can find the Indian journals. There's 3 sizes. The large and medium are covered with vintage sari fabric, and the small is
Paper and fabric.
It's all cotton rag paper, and they're just marvelous. And they were posted last evening, and orders are flying in. So if you're interested, I would suggest you go to the website today and order. If you're local, you can pick them up at the store. Go ahead and order them so you can reserve them and then pick them up at the store with your shopping appointment. So look forward to seeing the comments when I go back to social media role, and next week I'll be back behind the camera. Thank you so much for watching today.
Except for I can't get